Hello everyone, I am the Medic Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Jumpstart 2022, Kibo Uktabi Prince. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck techs, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Kibo is a 2/2 monkey noble for 2 generic and 1 green. However, since he has an activated ability that creates a token that can add either green or red mana, his actual color identity is red-green. As for this activated ability, it creates a banana token for each player. This token can be tapped and sacrificed to add either red or green to your mana pool, while also gaining you 2 life. So it's like a mix between treasures and food, where your mana is restricted, which is still good because it's in our colors. If that weren't enough, whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on each monkey and ape you control. This leads Kibo to being the commander for an anti-artifact deck that is also tribal for monkeys and apes. But wait, there's more. Whenever Kibo attacks, the defending player sacrifices an artifact, which further pushes his anti-artifact strategy. Since the deck benefits from being anti-artifact, let's first go over how we're going to pump our Simian army before showcasing the monkeys and apes I used. Branching Evolution, Hardened Scales, and Primal Vigor help accelerate that +1/+1 counter amount by increasing how many of them we put on our Simian army with each trigger. As a bonus, Primal Vigor also doubles the amount of tokens all players get. So when we activate Kibo, everyone gets 2 banana tokens, which also help further accelerate how many +1/+1 counters we just get from sacrificed bananas. Karn's Bastion and Sword of Truth and Justice also help increase the output of +1/+1 counters thanks to proliferating them. The Bastion doesn't even take up a slot in the deck, and the Sword has the added bonus of giving protection from white and blue. It also adds a +1/+1 counter itself, which is quite fitting. The Ozolith is included as a way to bank any +1/+1 counters lost due to our creatures getting blinked, bounced, exiled, killed, etc. That way we can then put them all on a game-ending attacker next combat. This card does some epic work here. Unnatural Growth doesn't put +1/+1 counters on our creatures, but it does significantly pump them. That's right, it doubles our creatures' power and toughness each combat, so we can pump them for attack and also pump them for defense. Having the quadruple green in its casting cost isn't even that problematic in a 2-color deck like this one, especially when we're creating bananas that can be used for green mana. Keswick Wolfrun and Skarg the Rage Pits are 2 more cards that don't take up slots in the deck for being mana generating lands that don't enter the battlefield tapped. While both can be used to give a creature trample, the former can also give +X+O to that creature. This is an amazing mana sink that can be used to give the occasional commander damage loss to a hapless opponent, especially with how much mana a red-green deck like this one can generate. Rogue's Passage is another land worth mentioning here, even though it doesn't pump the creature. While it might not pump it, making a huge beater unblockable might be enough to end the game, especially if that beater is a huge Kibo. Another card worth mentioning here is Jolene the Plunder Queen. Similarly to Kibo, she helps give our opponents artifact tokens to sacrifice in the form of treasure tokens. We also get treasure tokens, which is a huge plus, but giving opponents treasures and bananas might be too tempting for them to pass up. Sure, they accelerate their game, but so do we. And not just in mana acceleration, but the size of our Simian army. Plus, Jolene can also pump herself with +1/+1 counters by sacrificing treasure tokens, so it's win-win-win in this deck. As for how we're getting opponents to lose their artifacts, we can't just assume they'll be eating bananas and cracking treasures at our convenience. Besides, they might have artifacts of their own that need destroying. Fortunately, we have a couple of cards for that. Hammer Mage, Titania Song, Vandal Blast, and Bane of Progress are absolute all-stars in this deck. With Hammer Mage, all you have to do is pay 1, tap it, and discard a card to destroy all artifact tokens. This is essentially a repeatable meltdown whenever necessary. For the additional price of discarding a card, you can melt down at instant speed whenever you want. Super good. Titania's Song is even more evil here since it animates all artifacts, giving them a power toughness equal to their mana value. This essentially keeps artifact tokens off the battlefield. They are still created though, so each banana and treasure token gets sent to the graveyard as a state-based action upon creation. Kibo sees the artifact going to the graveyard and you still get the +1/+1 counters for it. Thus your opponents get no benefit from gifted bananas, but we get all of the benefits. We also don't get to use our bananas, but we're still getting a ton of +1/+1 counters for it. Best of all, Titania's Song effect still remains until the end of the turn if it were to leave the battlefield. Another niche use for Titania's Song is shutting down equipment, since they can't be equipped if they're creatures. It also gets rid of artifact lands too. It's just an amazing enchantment. Overloading Vandal Blast is a no-brainer here. It's always good to run in decks that can run it, but in here it's not just mass artifact hate, but synergistic as well. Bane of Progress is along the same vein, but it also hits enchantments. It does hit our own things, but at least we're getting a huge beater for it, as well as massively pumping our Simian army. It's a shame that Uktabi Kong is a silver bordered card and thus blanket banned along with all other silver bordered cards. There's nothing too wacky with it, and the reason it's an uncard is the callback to the misinterpretation of Uktabi Orangutan's original artwork. However, if your playgroup is okay with it, definitely run it. Not only will it destroy all artifacts upon entering the battlefield, but it's also an ape, so it gets all those +1/+1 counters too. If that's not enough, you can also create more apes by tapping down 2 apes. Again, nothing not seen in black bordered Magic, but it's banned solely because it's silver bordered. But I digress. Sardian Avenger is an amazing card for this deck. Even on its own, the card is amazing in certain metas. But in this particular situation, it's a shoo-in because we're giving opponents artifacts anyways. This is another way to punish your opponents for having artifacts since it's pumped for the number of artifacts they have, but it also pings opponents for each artifact sent to their graveyard. This card does some serious work here. Naglhorn is another card similar to Titania's Song in that it deprives opponents from using their gifted bananas or treasures. They can still use it afterwards, but at least they won't get immediate value from them since they enter the battlefield tapped and require tapping along with sacrificing in order to use them. As a bonus, it also destroys an artifact when it enters the battlefield. Gorilla Shaman, Silverback Elder, Uktabi Orangutan, and Kogla the Titan Ape also provide the deck with artifact hate but are potentially the best ones since they also benefit from the tribal aspect of the deck. Gorilla Shaman can destroy bananas for just 1 generic mana. Even if opponents sacrifice them in response, we're still getting the Kibo triggers for it. Uktabi Orangutan destroys the artifact only when it enters the battlefield, so it's more like a restricted reclamation stage, but it does benefit from the tribal aspect of the deck. Kogla, like Kibo, also gets rid of artifacts whenever it attacks, but it can also do so for enchantments as well. And it doesn't even care about attacking each turn since it's a 7/6 with the potential of becoming indestructible. If that wasn't enough, it also fights a creature when it enters the battlefield for that additional piece of interaction as well. This ape does some serious work here, both as a beater and interaction. Silverback Elder has a modal effect that's also very easy to trigger. We can naturalize whenever we cast a creature, which will be its most used mode. But depending on the situation, we can also filter the top 5 cards for a land or gain 4 life. When testing, I never used the last mode, but at least it's there for when we become the arch enemy. Good thing cracking bananas also gains us life. Balor also has a modal trigger that can get rid of artifacts. Whenever it attacks or dies, we can force an opponent to sacrifice a non-token artifact. This won't get rid of bananas, but at least it takes away that as an option when opponents have mana rocks or other key artifacts. The other modes are also useful, but it's mostly used as a 5/5 flying beater that can get rid of artifacts. Speaking of, Lucametal Coating, Lucametal Torque, and Thran Forge make Kibo's and Balor's attack trigger absolutely devastating. Same with Kogla. If the defending player doesn't have any artifacts in play, we can basically force them to sacrifice anything we want by turning it into an artifact in response to Kibo's, Kogla's, or Balor's trigger. This also works with targeted artifact or mass artifact hate too. But using either Lucametal artifact to turn any permanent into an artifact and force the opponent to sacrifice that one, for it being the only artifact they control, is too good to pass up. Thran Forge also does something similar, but it only turns creatures into artifact creatures, but it is repeatable since it doesn't require tapping. So it does help get rid of creatures, even the indestructible ones, since they're getting sacrificed and not destroyed. Don't sleep on these cards for a Kibo deck. Decimate also gets rid of an artifact, but it can also hit a creature, enchantment, and land. This card is good in all red-green decks anyways, but it bears showing how much artifact hate the deck is running that's also good on their own. Same with the deck's other interactive cards like Beast Within and Chaos Warp. While these are mostly used to get rid of absolutely any problematic permanent and thus good for all red-green decks, the fact remains that they can be used against artifacts in a pinch to help get that last pump needed for the Alpha Strike win. Same with Blasphemous Act too. While good on its own in all red decks, if our Simian army is thick enough, we'll actually have a board that'll survive Blasphemous Act, while our opponents probably won't. We can then swing in for the Alpha Strike and kill off the whole table. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast are included to deal with mass bounce effects like Evacuation, Etherize, and an Overlord or Cyclonic Rift, etc. Last thing we want is to lose our huge Simian army by having them lose all of their +1/+1 counters for being bounced to our hand. Granted, the previously mentioned Ozolith also handles that problem, but these can also hit blue permanents too, just in case. Ravenous Baboons also has interaction with its Enter the Battlefield trigger, but it hits non-basic lands instead of artifacts. That being said, getting rid of annoying lands like Rogue's Passage, Maze of Ith, Gaia's Cradle, etc. is still clutch. But using it to destroy artifact lands is quite the move though, so it can still potentially hit artifacts at least in that way. Alright, now let's see how else the deck benefits from its interesting mix of artifact hate and ape monkey tribal. First off is potentially the best card in the entire deck, which is Viridian Revel. Not only are people clamoring to include this in all of their green decks solely because of how prevalent treasures are in their meta, but in this deck it's not even a meta call, since we're giving opponents sacrificable banana tokens. Each time they sacrifice a banana we draw a card. Giving each opponent a banana per turn will definitely draw us into a ton of cards. And not only that, but when we're destroying other artifacts as well. This card does some serious work here independently of your meta. Idol of Oblivion and War Room take advantage of the deck to draw cards. Whenever we activate Kibo, we create tokens, so Idol of Oblivion will always have something to be able to tap to draw a card for it. War Room not taking up a space in the deck is amazing, but since Kibo only has 2 colors in its color identity, we only lose 2 life activating it, which is neutralized by sacrificing a banana. Oran Frostfang and Totsky Bear of Secrets also take advantage of the nature of the deck to draw cards. Pumping our Simian army means wanting to attack into our opponents as often as possible. Not only do each of these creatures draw us a card whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to an opponent, but Oran Frostfang also gives Death Touch to our attackers and Totsky is indestructible. These cards are all stars here. Wishkar's Expertise, Return of the Wild Speaker, and Soul's Majesty also have the potential of drawing us into insane amounts of cards because of how big our creatures can become. As always, bonus points for casting either Return of the Wild Speaker or Soul's Majesty off of Wishkar's Expertise. Inspiring Call can also draw us into a ton of cards due to how many creatures we'll probably have with +1/+1 counters on them. Not only that, but it also makes those creatures indestructible, which is quite the response to board wipes. Likewise, Heroic Intervention is included in the deck. It doesn't draw us into cards like Inspiring Call does, but the deck is creature based, so we need to protect them. Same with our commander, so Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots are also obvious includes. Not only do they provide protection from targeted spells and effects, but give haste too, which is super helpful for Kibo. Speaking of creature-based, Beast Whisperer, Guardian Project, Soul of the Harvest, and the Great Henge are absolutely amazing here. While the first one only triggers whenever we cast a creature spell, the last 3 trigger whenever the creature enters the battlefield. The deck doesn't have any blinking effects, so it doesn't really matter, but if an opponent had Torpor Orb type effects in play, at least we can draw cards off of Beast Whisperer. As a bonus, the Great Henge also puts a +1/+1 counter on that creature if it wasn't a token, and it can be tapped for double green mana while also gaining us 2 life. There's a reason this card is so expensive on the secondary market. If you don't already have it, can't afford it, nor won't proxy it, I would recommend running Illusionist Bracers in its place. The Great Hedge is the most expensive card in the deck, but it's not necessary for the deck to run. But swapping it out for something like Illusionist Bracers is great because when attached to Kibo, it has him give each player 2 bananas when activated, further accelerating the deck like some of the previously mentioned cards. It's also tutorable with Inventor's Fair. Since the bananas are artifacts, it's incredibly easy to get Inventor's Fair online. Sacrificing it to get either the Great Hedge, Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, Soul Ring, etc. into our hand, or whatever artifact we might need at that moment at instant speed is amazing. However, the main targets for Inventor's Fair are the previously mentioned 3 artifacts that can turn other cards into artifacts, so keep that in mind. Lastly, Reliquary Tower is another card that doesn't take up a slot on the deck, and with how many cards we can be drawing with this deck, it's definitely worth including. Last thing we want is drawing a ton of cards only to have to discard all but 7 of them. While the deck won't be too hungry for mana anytime soon, we can still take further advantage of our banana production. Kadama of the West Tree giving trample to all of our modified creatures is amazing here, with those creatures having +1/+1 counters on them. Not only that, but apart from making our beaters even more dangerous, its triggered effect is amazing here too. Whenever a modified creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we ramp for a basic land. Note how this is not limited per player, so we can potentially ramp for all of our basic lands in a single combat step. Super amazing. Inspiring Statuary and Jaheira, Friend of the Forest, do make the most of the bananas though, and are included thanks to them. Thanks to these, we can essentially turn the bananas into mana rocks, more so than restricted treasures. We can tap them down to help pay for non-artifact spells thanks to the Statuary, or use them as Mox Emeralds thanks to Jaheira. The mana acceleration is strong with these 2 cards. Same with Farseek, Nature's Lore, 3 visits into the north, and Rampant Growth. Thanks to the continued lopsidedness of double-typed lands, red-green decks have plenty of them to fetch for with my favorite ramp trifecta. The deck is also running all of its basics as snow-covered to make the most of Into the North, which can also be used to get Highland Forest. Ancient Tomb and Castle Garenbrig also help accelerate the deck a bit by tapping for a net gain in mana. The castle's extra mana boost can only be used on creature spells or activated abilities of creatures, but it still taps for green and doesn't take up a slot on the deck. Same with Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. The deck is mostly green, but this helps turn all of our lands into forests, even those future fetch lands, if we have nothing left in the deck to fetch for. Lastly, we have Soul Ring, which I mentioned earlier. However, this is the only mana rock in the deck since there are so many symmetric artifact destruction effects. Now we can finally see the rest of the apes and monkeys of the deck. Starting with the beaters the deck is running, which are Ferocious Tigerilla, Gorilla Berserkers, Gorilla Chieftain, Groom the Lonely King, Curd Ape, Curd Chieftain, Scrounging Bandar, and Wily Bandar. While we still don't have a large assortment of amazing apes and monkeys to choose from, like other prominent tribes have, or even other niche tribes like cats and dogs do, we still have enough to choose from to get that critical mass for a tribal deck like this one. While Kibo and the previously 3 mentioned are used for utility, these are more for making the most of getting +1/+1 counters and other pumps in order to go through to smash face with, whether because they have keywords or other ways in which they pump themselves with built-in effects. Ragavan Nimble Pilferer is another monkey that we want to consistently send into the fray. While an amazing 1-drop, it's not going to do much later in the game unless it's pumped and holding plenty of +1/+1 counters. That being said, when it does hit, we get mana acceleration plus potentially playing whatever card it exiles from the top of the defending player's library. While Ragavan is still quite pricey on the secondary market, it is a monkey, so it's more useful in the deck than the Great Henge is. But I will still provide a similar swap with Battle Mage's Bracers. Just as before, this will double our mana production, but you do have to spend 1 generic mana with it, while Illusionist's Bracers is free. That being said, this does at least also give haste to the equipped creature. So if those 2 cards are too expensive for you, just swap them out for both Bracers. Chameleon Colossus, Realm Walker, Tarian Mauler, and Mutavault are some more monkeys for the deck in changeling form. These are absolutely amazing here. Chameleon Colossus can become unfathomably huge with enough mana sunk into it. It also has protection from black, so no, it does not die to Doomblade. Tarian Mauler can also become huge in multiplayer games since it gets +1/+1 counters from each spell cast by an opponent. So not only is it getting +1/+1 counters from Kibo, but opponents as well. Giving this or Chameleon Colossus trample or making it unblockable can end games. Realm Walker also benefits from being both a monkey or an ape, but unfortunately you can only choose one as it enters the battlefield. Not counting changelings, there are 10 apes in the deck while there are only 4 monkeys, so choose ape for it. Mutavault doesn't even take up a slot in the deck since it's animated for only 1 generic mana. You can more often than not animate it whenever it would get those +1/+1 counters. Another key thing for these changeling creatures is that they're also human, which is key for making Kogla indestructible. Plus, bouncing them with Kogla will also trigger anything that cares about us casting creatures or having creatures enter the battlefield when we recast them. Treetop Village is another land that can animate as an ape. Unlike Mutavault, this one does require 1 more mana to animate, but at least it doesn't take up a slot in the deck and is a great way of having creatures that can survive board wipes if it's only a land. Monkey Cage is another way to increase our monkey count without it being a monkey itself. If on the battlefield before we cast an effective monkey like Kogla, Groon, Silverback Elder, etc., and we get a bunch of 2/2 monkeys for our trouble. Again, we don't have much in terms of great ape and monkey selection, but Monkey Cage isn't that bad of a card anyways. Maskwood Nexus comes in clutch for that lack of amazing apes and monkeys by giving all of our creatures all creature types. Not only is this amazing for the deck, but it can also be used to create more shapeshifters with Changeling, which equates to having even more apes and monkeys for Kibo's trigger. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 7 fetch lands, Stomping Ground, Cinderglade, Sheltered Thicket, Highland Forest, Wooded Ridge, and Command Tower, along with 6 snow-covered forests and 2 snow-covered mountains to make the most out of Into the North and other basic land wrap effects. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Kibo Uktabi prints. While there aren't that many amazing monkeys and apes for the deck, at least you can do with those that are available, as well as changelings. Best of all the synergistic interaction effects are great on their own, making the deck 100% not dependent on Kibo. In any case, he's easy to recast and you're in green, so you'll have enough mana to recast him multiple times in a game. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Meta Kirby, and happy brewing.